Hey guys, welcome back, I'm Jay. In this episode, we're gonna look at the S3 access control. By default, new S3 buckets are private. You can use a bucket policy to allow public access to a bucket. You can control access to your S3 bucket and objects using IAM policies, access control lists, bucket policy, and access points. You can turn on block all public access options to prevent public access permissions granted by ACLs, bucket policy or access points. You can also enable access logs on S3 bucket to automatically log all requests, such as get, put, and delete requests. Access logs can be sent to another bucket in the same or different AWS account. Access logs is a great way to audit activities on your bucket. Buckets and objects are resources. The resource owner refers to the AWS account that creates the resource. A bucket owner is the AWS account that creates the bucket. An object owner is whoever uploads the object. An object owner can be different from the bucket owner. For instance, an AWS account can upload an object to a bucket that was created by a different AWS account. A bucket owner or object owner can grant public access to S3 objects. Public access means unauthenticated access made by anonymous users. A bucket owner can set block all public access on a bucket. It will block public access to all objects and prevent permission granted through access control lists, bucket policy, or access points. Managing access refers to permitting users or AWS accounts to perform resource operations by writing an access policy. For instance, you can grant put object permission to an IAM user in an AWS account, so that the user can upload objects to your bucket. In addition to granting permissions to individual users and accounts, you can grant public access to everyone including unauthenticated users or authenticated AWS users. Unauthenticated access is also called anonymous access. Authenticated access means access granted to users with AWS credentials. For instance, if you use a bucket to host a website, you may want to make all objects public by granting the get object permission to everyone. Access policy describes who can access which resources. There are two types of access policies in S3, resource-based policies and user-based policies. Resource-based policy means you can attach it to resources. Access control lists and bucket policies are resource-based policies, because you can attach them to S3 resources. User-based policies are policies which can be attached to users, groups or roles. IAM policies are user-based policies. Each bucket and object can have an ACL associated with it. An access control list or ACL is a list of grants, identifying the grantee and permissions granted. An ACL can be either an object ACL or a bucket ACL, to grant basic permissions to other AWS accounts or anonymous users. Object ACLs control only object-level permissions, each object ACL is specified per object. Object ACLs are the only way to manage access to objects not owned by the bucket owner. Bucket ACL controls bucket-level permissions. However, the only recommended use case for a bucket ACL is to grant write permission to the Amazon S3 log delivery group to write access log objects to your bucket. You cannot grant permission to specific IAM users with ACLs. ACLs can only allow access, but not deny access. A bucket policy is associated with a bucket. It can grant permissions for all S3 operations to anonymous users, IAM users, or other AWS accounts, to perform operations on any resources in a bucket, such as objects and subresources. Bucket policy can both allow or deny actions. A bucket owner cannot grant permissions on objects which it doesn't own. For instance, a bucket policy granting object permissions applies only to objects owned by the bucket owner. However, the bucket owner who pays the bills can write a bucket policy to deny access to any objects in the bucket, regardless of who owns the object. The bucket owner can also delete any objects in the bucket. IAM policies are associated with IAM users, groups or roles. You can grant permissions to allow or deny S3 operations to IAM users with IAM policies. However, you cannot grant permissions to anonymous users with IAM policies. S3 Access Points is a new feature launched in December 2019. Access Points simplifies the management of data sharing at scale. Previously you have to configure all bucket-wide access in one bucket policy. It's not flexible when you have multiple teams that require different levels of access. Access Points lets you create multiple dedicated access policies, and work in conjunction with bucket policy. With access points, you can only perform operations on objects, not on the bucket. For instance, you can only get object or put object, but you cannot modify or delete the bucket using access points. You can access S3 access points via REST API. Access points only supports the host style URLs. In this episode, we've learned access control in S3. S3 offers different ways to control access to data stored in a bucket. You can configure IAM policies to control access to S3 buckets and objects for IAM users, groups and roles. IAM policies are user-based policies. You can use access control lists to control access to S3 objects at the object level. You can attach a bucket policy to an S3 bucket and control access to the bucket and objects at the bucket level. You can use access points for more dedicated access control for S3 object operations. Okay, that's all for S3 access control. Thanks for watching and see you in the next episode.
Hope you've enjoyed watching this episode. If you liked the video, please help us and hit the like button. If you want to watch more tutorials, please subscribe to the Cloudemy TV channel. Make sure to turn on the notification and stay tuned. At Cloudemy, we're passionate about cloud and AI technology. Please share your feedback and thoughts in the comments below. Feel free to let us know what topics you'd like to watch. Happy watching and happy learning.